Hi there, good morning. Hi, Ashley.
Hello,
Hello,
hi
welcome.
Kerry.
I don't think we've got anyone else waiting just yet, have we? No. Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, I'll kick off because we're going to record this session as well today. So, um, thank you for joining us. And today's webinar is just having a bit of a closer look at what we do once a project actually starts in terms of implementing a new ERP system and some of the things that I guess we've learned at Paradise over the years of doing it and things that might be quite helpful or quite useful. Um, Apologies in advance for not really looking at the camera. I've got a couple of screens set up and staring at presentations on other screens, so bear with me. um, so just a little bit about me, for those that don't know me to start off with, and my background. Oop, I'm being joined by a dog. Bandit, please, go on, off. So I'm the sales director here at Paradise, and I am also a qualified Prince 2 project manager. So quite a lot of what we're going to look at today and bits that I'm going to talk about are more or less lifted or slight amendments from what you'd see in the Prince 2 project management book, but they are principles that we kind of work by here at Paradise. Um, my background before joining Paradise was working for an engineering firm, so sort of light manufacturing. And while I was there, we moved from Sage 50 to Sage 200, and I kind of led that project internally at the time. Decided I loved the stress of that kind of project so much, I'd come and pursue that as a career. I joined Paradise in 2014 and started off on our support desk, and then have worked up through project management and then into sales from there, really. Um, and I quite enjoy the job because for me, it's kind of building partnerships and delivering, solutions that work for customers and seeing how they kind of grow and thrive on those new platforms is a good feeling. So just to cover off a little bit about ERP for manufacturing in general, um, we've got a couple of slides here just to illustrate a little bit. When we talk about Sage, especially, people tend to think it's just accounting. And this rather busy graphic here shows what else ERP actually means, what else it can actually involve when we talk about it. So I'm just going to turn on my little laser pointer here, and then we can kind of see. So normally when we talk about Sage, we're looking at just financials and accounting, but through partners like us here at Paradise, we're able to offer an awful lot more on the same platform, and the combination of all of those things are what we would call ERP. So as well as just your pure finance, it would also cover things like sales, purchase order processing, CRM systems, supply chain, warehouse distribution. And then particularly around manufacturing, it's possible to have a lot of add-ons through companies like Cycon or Sim for Sage 50, where we can then start to add things like MRP, works orders, bill of materials, and have that as part and parcel of the same system. And then where Paradise add more layers on top of that ERP platform and the software itself is through things like the infrastructure and the cloud hosting for those systems, and then also things like your training for your users, and perhaps some bespoke development as well if that's needed at all. So while that's a relatively busy graphic, just to put it into context of a manufacturing company, I guess some of the areas that you might want to think about or where software can kind of touch different business departments. So we'll start off with sales. I've got a mobile sales reps, not quite there yet in my Lamborghini, but for us, it's quite useful for us to have access to perhaps customer data, past order history, things like that on a mobile app. So that needs to link into your ERP system. Then we've got your sort of traditional IT, I would say, in terms of finance and admin team that would want access to things like Sage. Then our purchasing and planning team that might want access to see what kind of stock they need to order from suppliers, and access to those supplier accounts. Then we start to look at things like perhaps EDI feeds or how you might want to send information automatically to certain suppliers to place orders. If it's relevant, you might also need to consider supplier shipping and tracking containers, and then the stock will land at your warehouse. So consideration around handheld devices for uh, booking goods in and out of your warehouse and stock management. Then when we kind of talk about manufacturing, generally there'd be an operations team that might do things like plan works orders, plan production scheduling, and send those works orders out to the production facility. Um, and again, out here, we could look at automating this process and tracking works orders through sort of handheld devices as well. Very typical that we would see in a manufacturing company. One of their biggest problems is that once a works order leaves an office on a bit of paper, it's then just in a black hole until it reappears in the office and they say that it's done. In our warehouse, again, for kind of goods out. So again, perhaps barcoding type systems for managing goods dispatch. And in delivery, so whether that's your own transport or using third-party couriers, you might want to consider how you send that information to the couriers. Do you want that to be automatic? And if it's your own vehicles, do you want some sort of tracking system or the ability to have customers sign on glass when their goods are actually delivered? And then lastly, but ultimately most importantly, are your customers. So what information do they want from your ERP system and how are they going to get it? Is it just sending out emails, or do you want them to have some sort of portal where they might be able to self-help or look at their own stock on your system without having to ring you? So that's another consideration. So ERP implementation then. So the point of this webinar today really is it's part two of a small series that we're doing at the minute. And the first part was mainly around how you might actually try and find a partner in the first place, what things you might look out for when trying to select a partner to help you implement a new ERP, and sort of at a high level, what things you should and shouldn't do when considering a new ERP project. Now, the feedback from the first webinar we did was that people wanted to know a little bit more about, well, what happens after that then. So you've picked your partner, you've picked the product or the software that you want to go with and the solution. How does the project actually work? So this is very much going to be our Paradise's take, I guess, on what those steps are once we're kind of at the point where we've agreed that we're the partner you're going to work with, and we've agreed roughly on the solution that we think we want to go for. So what happens then? And the four key areas I've broken this down into today are around project scoping. So what do you actually want? The project roles, and by project roles, that is context of you as the customer. Who's going to be involved and what should they be doing, timescales, and then documentation as well. So what you can expect from your partner and what you should probably look at doing internally. So scoping first of all. Now, it's always a little bit of a fine line with scoping. We've seen some projects where companies might have nothing at all written down. And then occasionally we also come across tender documents, which can be Excel spreadsheets with about 900 questions, and it's very, very rigid. So it's very difficult for an IT partner to actually give an easy answer to some of those questions. So what you really need to consider is two things, I would say. One is the minimum viable solution. What is the minimum that you could get away with to sort of replace what you've got today and give you your absolute baseline requirements? And then from there, you'd want to consider what your must-haves are and what your nice-to-haves are. So here's all the stuff we must have on day one, and here's all the bits that we'd like to have if we could accommodate it, cost permitting, time permitting, and everything else. Or maybe they're things that we need to consider, and can we have those in future with what your IT partner is suggesting and putting forward. In terms of actually writing a document, it doesn't have to be anything too big or too special. Just a side of A4 and some bullet points is absolutely fine, but that really goes quite a long way to helping a partner understand what it is you want and how we might best deliver it. Most partners, us included, would build on that and expand on your requirements document as part of a proposal. It's also quite important to prevent any scope creep. So again, if all parties are quite clear at the beginning about what it is we're actually trying to deliver, then it makes it a lot easier for all involved to stop adding bits on and kind of forgetting what those original goals were. And then from your perspective, it also helps you align the project with any business goals. So what is it the business has set out to do with this versus what is it that your internal project team that are working on it are actually going to implement and end up with. If it's not a skill that you've got in-house or you're not confident about doing it, it is possible that you could look at a third party to come and do that paid scoping. We at Paradise would do that as a pre-project exercise, and equally you might look at a completely independent third-party consultant to come and do some scoping that's got no real allegiance to any particular kind of software. So just to give a bit of an example here, so ultimately the project scope will come out of two things. So it will come out of the IT partner's proposal document that they've put forward and your requirements list. So you've written a requirements list. The IT partner would probably go away at that point, conduct some demos and put together a proposal for you that says, right, here's what we're going to deliver. And between those two, that's sort of generating what your scope would be. So just as a bit of an example here, we're saying in the project scope, we are going to deliver a finance system with bill of materials, works orders, material resource planning or MRP, and some document management. That's kind of what all parties have decided should form part and parcel of this scope. And while it was on the customer's requirements documents, we've all acknowledged that you would like a CRM system, you'd like some barcode scanners, and you might like some sort of barcoding platform, but at the moment they're not in the context of this project that we're going to deliver. But it is worth all parties being involved that you would want that in the future, and whatever platform your partner builds for you, it needs to be sort of ready, if you like, to accommodate those bits in future. And then it is also worth defining what's not in scope. So we are actively not including any kind of bespoke production reporting in this instance, and we're not including any infrastructure whatsoever. I would say it's just as important that those out of scope bits are documented and written down as everything that you want to include as well. So project roles, like I said at the beginning, quite a lot of this for us is born out of the Prince 2. Ideally, and this is where there's some separation involved, you as the customer should really have your own project board, your own set of roles and responsibilities, and they are different to those of your IT partners that are implementing it. Both parties involved in these IT projects have got different aims. The aim of us as the IT partner is to deliver a solution and ultimately make a profit, make some money out of that. Whereas for you as a customer, the aim of the project is to have a new solution delivered so that you're able to get your return on investment in that cost and have a better system. It's quite important for you to make sure that you appoint a strong project lead or a project champion internally, someone that's quite interested in the project and wants to see it be successful. And I would normally suggest that that person should not necessarily be the same person that's signing the checks. So in smaller businesses, typically that can end up being an MD owner who also ends up leading the project. And it's quite difficult to separate what they want from a commercial point of view, and they've invested the money in it, so it needs to succeed, versus someone that might be a bit more objective about their views on the project and perhaps know when to say no to certain things. And then lastly, it's getting staff buy-in and support as well. So the more staff that are at least actively aware and interested in the project, the better. So for anyone that does know Prince 2, this might look familiar, but these are kind of the key roles that I've identified. So from the customer's perspective, from your perspective, you'd have a business layer. So that's business as usual, really. Your MD sat on that level. The business has decided they want to go ahead with a new ERP system, and they might put together a project board. Maybe one or more people that will actually be involved at your end to run the project. And typically there's 3 roles involved there. So the most important role is the project executive. So this is the person who's going to make the decisions on the project and feed back to the business layer with how it's going. A senior user could be the project executive as well, but the senior user is the person that would represent the rest of the user base for whatever this system is going to be, and would be responsible for making sure it all gets tested properly and that any kind of feedback from the rest of the users is listened to and addressed and sorted out. And then you have what we call a senior supplier. Now, probably quite often a common misconception that the senior supplier from the customer's perspective is the IT partner, and it isn't. That's really someone internal that would represent the partner, and making sure that you're keeping that partner in check and that they are delivering what you want them to deliver. They wouldn't normally represent themselves, and that's your internal project board. So under the senior user, you'd also have then your employees, your heads of departments, and your team members. So everyone else in the business that might use part of this system you're going to implement would all kind of feed back and feed into the senior user. And it's the senior user's responsibility to make sure that they do adequate testing. Also involved in your project board then would be your project manager. So this is whoever you've appointed internally to sort of lead the project and keep it moving forward. And depending on the size of the project, you might also have, perhaps heads of departments that form part of that project team and have dedicated project roles as well, if necessary. And on our side of the fence as your IT partner, we would be involved in your project, but ultimately we'll have our own project manager, our own team leaders, and our own team members that are going to deliver our side of the project to you. And it's just having that separation or clear divide between what they are delivering for us and what your internal staff are delivering for you as part of that project. The project timescales. Realistic timescales is normally the biggest one that we come across. The most successful projects we've seen are those that have had realistic timescales. You need to think quite early on in a project, and it really forms part of your requirements, is how soon that you need it and why you need it by a certain time. So is this just that the business is growing and therefore as long as it's done in the next year or so, that's fine? Or is there a new product line coming in that you can no longer handle on Excel spreadsheets and it has to be done within 2 or 3 months? Or old systems are going to become unsupported by a certain date and therefore it has to be done by a particular hard deadline. And that's all very, very important when it comes to actually scoping the project and setting out your initial requirements. Phasing ERP projects is also quite important. So again, we would not necessarily try and implement everything all at once. And that, again, decision on what happens in phase 1 versus phases 2 and 3 sort of comes out of your must-haves versus your nice-to-haves later down the line. And if a project does have multiple phases, then we'd normally recommend a bedding in period between those phases. So one of the biggest things in any project or any biggest challenges is cultural change for your staff. And if you try and implement too much too quickly, then it tends to fall apart a bit. You tend to lose a bit of faith and a bit of interest from staff. So bedding in a first phase, allowing your staff to get comfortable and give some feedback that's positive and say, yeah, no, we like this system, it's good. And then you can introduce the next bit on top of that. So I've got a bit of an illustrative timeline here for a typical project that we would see. Now this example starts in January 2024, and we would normally see a couple of months worth of pre-sales activity and demos. So it would be during this phase that you as a customer would put together your requirements list, and where us as an IT partner would be matching that against a series of proposals, product demonstrations, between us both, then determining, okay, here's what we're going to deliver for you in that first, in that first phase. Complicated projects, then you might also look at a project scoping exercise. So during March, we've got here, that could be a separate paid for exercise that dives an awful lot deeper into that first phase and details it, more heavily with here's exactly what's going to happen as part of that project and in each phase. And then for very large projects, we might also look at a solutions workshop or proof of concept. So that phase would actually be your IT partner putting together a dummy platform for you with what they've intended to implement so that the customer can test it and say, yeah, that's what we wanted. So then we're into sort of May, really, before you start the main project. So 4 months later, before we're looking at phase 1. So during this first phase of the project, you'd have infrastructure and installation pretty early on. So that would be perhaps your IT company or your partner putting together the platform, IT that you need. Then consultancy and test data migrations would normally take around 6 weeks. So that's looking at actually setting up the platform in a way that they think that you need it, and collaborative working between the two parties, feedback from the customer to say yes or no, that's not quite what we wanted. And you normally get a bit of an overlap there with user training as well. So during that phase would begin all of the training for your users, and that allows them to start actually testing the platform properly as well. And then usually 3 or 4 weeks worth of actual testing from the customer and feedback. I would say it's always very important for a customer at that point to never be rushed on the user acceptance testing. If you need longer, then you tell your IT partner that you need longer to test it properly. During that phase, you've got all the time you need to test it, have it corrected, and make it right, basically. Once you've gone live, everything becomes a lot more stressful if something isn't quite right and orders are being held up at the door, etc. So do as much as you can during that testing phase. And then you'd have a go live. Typically that would be done in a single business day where the project actually goes live and you're up and running on your new system. And then really what you'd expect from any IT partner is a good 2 or 3 weeks of quite close support where they're giving you as much attention as you need, fixing any other minor issues as quickly as possible, and just helping you sort of settle in on that new system. Then I mentioned earlier a bedding in period, so I would suggest a good couple of months of actually bedding in on that phase that's been implemented, letting everybody get used to it, let it settle within the business. And once everybody's sort of happy and okay with the new platform that's been implemented, you can kind of look at repeating sort of the phase 1 bit onwards again for whatever's next, a manufacturing module being put in or a warehousing module being put in after that. And the whole thing there is running over about 10 months. So that gives you a fairly good idea as to how long it might take. And then project documentation. Obviously very important because it prevents misunderstanding between you and your IT partner. It's also very useful for you as a customer for any future reference, especially with staff turnover. New staff coming into the business could look back at that and understand what had been done, how it was intended to work, how they might need to use it. Important to keep documents up to date. So if you do write any sort of user guides for yourselves during testing, it's worth updating those as you go and after the project's gone live so that they're relevant for any new staff. And then lastly, document ownership. So don't rely on your IT partner to write all of the documentation. It's worth writing your own that you understand and you can keep updated as well. So what I've put together on this next slide is just a bit of an idea of some of the documentation we might put together as part of a project. What we would do as an IT partner, and ideally what you might do on your side as a customer. So starting off before the project really begins, the business themselves might put together a business case or a justification for doing it, or a business plan. Your requirements list, as we mentioned earlier on, and obviously a purchase order that would match whatever proposal the partner's put in front of you. And the partner might write some sort of scoping report if you did that as a separate exercise, a proposal sort of based off your requirements, and a sales order to match that as well for you. And once you've begun the project, we as an IT partner would put together a few bits. So first document would be a statement of works. This is a more detailed version of the proposal minus the financials bit that would go into a bit more detail of the who, why, what, when. We would put together some UAT guidelines. So testing guidelines, and guidelines is probably the key word there because every single business operates differently. And it's not really possible for us as an IT partner to write a really detailed testing plan for every customer. So we can certainly give a guideline. We'd also issue regular project logs. Typically for us, these would go out every week, and it's just, I guess, a stake in the ground of here's what's been done so far, here are the current actions. Then as we get into testing, we'd ask the customer to sign off the testing before going live, and we'd also write a go live plan. So very specifically on the day of go live, who is doing what and when. On your side of the project, also worth keeping hold of regular project logs, whether that's using the one provided by your partner or having your own internal ones for your actions and your staff. That's worth doing. Having an internal project plan. So, suppliers said, we're doing X, Y, and Z, but what are you doing? What are your staff doing? Who's responsible for what? Training notes and detailed training plans. So who do you want to test? What areas of the system? Do they need to keep notes? And if so, what notes do you want them to keep? Do you want them to sort of write some internal user guides as well as they're testing it so that other staff know how to use the system? And a go live plan as well. So again, your IT partner is going to tell you what they expect to happen during that go live process. You may just use theirs. You might want to expand on that for your own staff as well. And then once the project's actually gone live, that would more or less be it from your IT partner. Then we would ask for a project sign off once the project's actually gone live. But it might be useful internally for you to put together a lessons learned report. So perhaps what's gone well in the project, what hasn't gone so well, what might you take away and do differently in any kind of future phases. So hopefully that gives a bit of an idea of what sort of documents to consider as you put a project together. So just wanted to touch on just a few success stories really and projects that Paradise have worked on in the past. So there's a few names on there you might recognize, but Norton Motorcycles is always one that pops up. So we worked with them over several years and around 4 implementation phases. And they went from a Sage 50 using Excel spreadsheets to manage all of their motorcycle building. They introduced a new motorcycle that had 4 times the number of components as their current lineup. And for them, that was a trigger to say, right, we need to look at a new system that's going to handle that. We can't do it on Excel. So we came in and introduced Sage 200 as the first phase and just replaced Sage 50, and that was it. So a relatively small requirement to begin with, and it allowed their finance team to get to grips with Sage 200 and ultimately say, yep, we like this, we're happy. And then phase 2 was bringing in works orders and material resource planning to replace the Excel spreadsheets. And that happened about a year later. So quite a spread out process, but what it meant was that when the operational staff started using works orders and material resource planning, they had their own finance team to fall back on who already knew Sage 200, who knew how it worked, and who could help and support them internally rather than everybody trying to learn it all at the same time. And that worked really well. It made it quite a smooth implementation. Then about a year after that, they decided that their warehousing operation was getting larger. They wanted to be able to have better traceability with batch and serial numbering. So we then implemented a barcoding and warehousing system using Android handhelds. And again, that was relatively smooth. By that point, 2/3 of the business are already using Sage 200 and the manufacturing side, so it made it quite easy to sort of slide in the next phase and start digitizing their warehouse. So it gives you a bit of an idea of how you might sort of put these projects together. And we wouldn't be in Northampton if we didn't work with the shoe manufacturers. So at the bottom there, we have worked over the years with Trickers, Ken Hall, Churches, and WS Forrester as well. So, just to recap, really, sort of the 4 takeaway points when you're actually looking at implementing a project. Having a clear scope and requirements, I think early on is pretty important just to keep everybody on track. Having your own project roles internally away from the IT partner, so who at your end is actually doing what, who is responsible for what, is really important. Timescale, being realistic with the timescale and sort of identifying quite early on, how soon does it need to be done and why does it need to be done by that time. And then documentation, so keeping your own detailed records, keeping hold of any documents that your IT partner provides for future use is very useful. Okay, so a relatively short one compared to our first webinar, and we'll probably follow up with a few more, but I'll open the floor up just briefly. Has anybody got any questions or anything they would like to know more about with implementing a project? Oh, hi, Ron.
Hi, Alex. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Good. Very well, thanks. I did have a question. When you're doing an ERP implementation, should you include an IAM solution as part of it? If the IAM product, like a sale point or something like that, is separate to the solution?
I don't think it's a yes or no answer to that. I think it probably depends a fair bit on what you would perceive your internal business appetite be to take that on. The biggest factor I think always comes down to how well will the business adapt to it, that cultural element.
Yeah.
If the team you've got is fairly equipped to deal with it and can take that on as well at the same time, then yes. If you feel like it might be too much change all at once, or if there's a fair bit of internal bubbling and people not wanting to make the changes or apprehensive about the project, then probably no. We've had projects where perhaps most of a shop floor team is very anti very anti putting in a new system. So in those instances, we might say, right, well, let's pick the finance team who kind of want this, get them all happy, and then they can sell it to the rest of the company afterwards, and then it's a lot easier. We have had instances where we've tried to do it all at once at the customer's request, and it does fall down at that point. So, and other times it will be absolutely fine. So I think the answer to that comes more down to your internal project team and their appetite to how much can they handle at once, and any kind of IT partner won't really be able to judge that on your behalf. So yeah, I don't know if that helps or not really.
It does actually.
Yeah.
A lot of what you said does help from a implementation perspective where I find that they just consume with the actual project. And then when you introduce an IAM requirement for identity access management. It's like, no, you have to take it off. Yeah, take it off the main project and
Yeah.
try and retrofit that into the project at some point.
Well, that's it, and I think that's where it's really important to be clear at the very beginning about your, the requirements,
Yeah,
what's
scope
not
and
included, but
yeah,
actually what definitely what's your future phase. I know
yeah,
for us, and when we look at implementing, if we implemented Sage 200, for example, um, we need to know that the customer in 2 or 3 years might want to add a barcoding system, or they really want serial and batch traceability because it has a significant impact on the first phase.
mm,
So it's important that all parties know that that is going to happen in the future, even if we're not including it right now.
yeah,
So that becomes quite key. I think one of the biggest areas that we would tend to leave, or I guess, um, fight a customer on saying, no, you can't have that straight away, is reporting. Reporting will always have to follow because ultimately you need to use a new system and start putting data in before you really know what you want out of it, and how you want that to look. Um, Everyone loves a good dashboard, but no one can really say what it should say, what
yeah,
should it have on it until you actually use it and you know what you want. So
yeah,
that's quite difficult to kind of judge. Um, but I would say from your perspective, from a customer's perspective, always push back on a partner that's trying to get you to do it all at once. Um, that's not the right way to do it,
mm,
and it will always come down to your staff and what you think they can handle internally.
yeah. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
no problem. Have we got anyone else with any questions? We'll wrap up there and let everyone grab a coffee before lunch. No, all good. All right,
Thank
brilliant.
you.
I'll let you all disappear. Yeah, we'll send out a recording on this one as well afterwards. And Cassandra perhaps will send out the recording from the first webinar as well if anybody's interested. So thank you very much, everybody, and
Thank
enjoy
you.
your day. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.